Hello, everybody. This is the Great Witness Show with Kevin, and the new adventure series is, and Kevin is going to share his experiences with us, and we're going to be commenting and asking questions of Kevin. And these are real side experiences, and these are related to our real awareness. You could say dreams are related to our personal self, but these are unique and special to themselves. So Kevin is here, and to share, I'm Dean Val. We're here with Tim and possibly Charles. So welcome everybody, and take it away, Kevin. Thank you.
This real side experience was similar to other previously recounted experiences where the galactic group were having their Skype meetings on the real side. For of course, the technology that the dark forces have created can be utilized for beneficial reasons, such as we are using it for, but it has its limitations, can be rather temperamental, and more importantly, is that since the dark forces own it, at any time they can restrict it or even shut it down. Consequently, the Nufriends and the various aware individuals have been practicing real side communications by various means. Ultimately, we would be standing being to being, one all aliveness awareness, and so travelling to the location of another individual, or connecting to another individual stationed at a different spot in creation for communication purposes would be unnecessary, as motion and dialogue between personal body vehicles is only to be found in creation and with personal self to personal self interaction. But it's a transition gradually from this personal self and creation-based interaction to this eventual real awareness being to being state. And so, on the real side, we are all practicing and becoming more adept at recreating real side Skype sessions, communicating by telepathy, and more so moving into impressions, as we all become better able to transmit and read what would be then isness-based real awareness exchanges. So it is the building up of a UNUversal community that is not limited and restricted to the physical, or restricted to the reptilian created black magic technologies. And it seems we are preparing for the possibility of a breakdown in communications on the physical, and in such a scenario, I suspect our Skypes and such would switch entirely to the real side, if, say, we had purposely orchestrated power shortages or global blackouts. Or perhaps these real side Skypes are also due to the continued and steady focus of those with the real intent to see their process of is recognition through, as this is reflected on the real side also as galactic Skypes that never end, a constant exchange of experiences and insights, as we assist and support each other through what we share, like how the real guides are constant in their focus, they are 100% with the ease, the supporting and sharing of it, and we are endeavouring to do likewise. So there I was, in the middle of a galactic Skype with the Galaxseers, and the technology we were utilising on the real side was far more advanced and sci-fi than that which we use on the physical. As Duane has said, on the real side, the real awareness has access to all this technology. It can just pull it out from whichever source it came from, and much like the real awareness can see everything of creation and all the created lifetimes ever lived in the simulator, it can see everything ever technologically created in it also, and select the best technology for whatever is required from whichever era or planet to utilise on the real side. And so, rather than the usual array of Wi-Fi brain-frying computers, temperamental connections, and too many wires, in this experience each of the Galaxseers were located wherever they were on the real side, and each had access to a brilliantly glowing bright blue screen of data that floated before them. It was as though we were becoming accustomed to this technology, making a few errors, figuring out how to use it correctly, but it ran very similar to a regular Skype. You accepted the real side call by passing a hand over a part of the blue screen of data and unmuting and muting yourself in similar fashion. A little like those sci-fi movies, where the computers float as graphics and data of light in the air, and the users just wave their hands over it to use it. The scene would switch, and the galactic group were positioned in an area of the real side that was all flowing light, nothing else featured. It was a case also that we could not actually see each other in the personal sense. We had not taken on form, as it were. We were just a part of this glowing white-yellow light, and had the impressions of each other. This, then, was more along the lines of the being-to-being real awareness state, that which we are striving for eventually, and which would then make all technologies on the physical and even the more advanced real side technologies superfluous. A being-to-being state, which is the ultimate expression of being, beyond the body forms and personal selves of creation and the physical level worlds. But of course, we still need the physical bodies to share and promote the true reality also. We need a physicality of a form for creation to relate to. In this position of just light and being impressions, we were preparing to bring in 2 new individuals, and who would be very significant individuals, into the galactic group, on the real side and the physical also, assuming the agreement we had with them here filtered through to their personal selves, which then also agreed. They both were women, one slightly older than the other. An attachment bound them. My impression was that of perhaps mother and daughter, and both had come from religious backgrounds. They also had tremendous potential as seers, very advanced in this ability, though awareness speaking, they were just starting out. Nevertheless, they would be great assets, and as we engaged them on the real side, it was as though we moved from the position of light we were in, almost through an invisible barrier, as you could feel the slight transition from a place of greater recognition and awareness to one of slightly less, to the positions where these women were stationed. For they were in their body forms, and as we phased from our light positions, we assumed form also, perhaps as to better facilitate interaction with the two seer women, as they were probably unable to recognize the light impressions that we were, had we remained in such states of being. The scene switched one last time, and we were either in one of the real side UNUversities, or it was perhaps a future view of such on the earth, when these UNUversities of real education become established, if agreement allows them to be. The galactic group and I were here again, and we were to present our real side experiences on a stage, before a large gathering of individuals seated in the audience. Interestingly, that which I was going to share were the real side experiences most recently received at the time of the sharing of this real side experience. So perhaps, then, not a future view, and indicating again that which we are doing on the physical, we also are broadcasting on the real side, sharing our experiences throughout the real side UNUversities and the real side generally to all that may listen. There was an announcer preparing the audience and warming them up for the galactic group who would be sharing their experiences on the stage shortly. She was a fine-featured blonde woman, and I suspect, very likely, she was Ava. Duane was also in attendance, for he would be sat on stage, and much like he does with the physical level SKYPEs, he would provide his viewpoints and insights in response to every experience shared. Interestingly also were the body forms that we elected to assume, for we all were in the form of large four-legged cats, like lions and tigers, but of all manner of exotic colorations and fur designs. My form was that of a kind of dazzling blue striped tiger, so it does seem this large cat form is rather a regular theme on the real side also. Many have reported seeing these large felines, and on a few previous real side experience, one that I shared consisted of an audience with 3 females who had taken this form, and with a large golden lion that I had the impression was Duane as their protector. So I'm uncertain as to the significance of the four-legged large cat form, but it does seem to be one adopted in various situations by those of the more aware persuasion. Duane, the great writer, responded to this experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "We are preparing, and let's see who shows up here with the two girls in your real side experience. It's always a challenge too. At first, there's always resistance. It's quite a process to get people to see what we're doing, because it's a whole lot. There was an experience shared by the new seers, where one of them were shown that a number of individuals from the new seers group were very attached to ideas of the physical. Then you came along in a flying saucer, and eventually we all got to the farm in Mexico, as the idea is to show people how to become self-sufficient, like a farm on the earth, etc. So we're going through a lot of a process. So if people are singing the NUUU song and paying attention to what we're sharing, they will start to get it, but it takes time."
It's a great confirmation how I mean, remember in Eckankar, we didn't get any of this stuff that, confirmation that we talked about, that's whatever's happening in the physical, there's things going on in the real side. We didn't really get into particulars. I didn't, at least. But this is great that this is a confirmation that things are happening all over creation, and this is just part of it in the physical, and there's so much more behind the scenes. Paul and REBISAR and the real guides, they don't eat, they don't sleep. They're 24/7. They're doing things to prepare for us, for everybody, that, they're active all the time, setting things up, contacting individuals, beings. It's nonstop. So this is a great confirmation for that. Constant series of insights. Yeah, what these Skypes do, it's a great, Kevin, this is great, what you're sharing. I mean, nothing like this we had in Eckankar. It's just nothing, We just sit around and go over the discourses and just kind of say this or that. That really nothing particular. They'd share their experiences sometimes, but they weren't defined like Duane does, that, that give viewpoints on them. People would just, I don't remember what they did. We just share experiences and they make a few comments, but nothing like what is today being defined with them, with what Kevin's doing with his explanations of each one, and what Duane's doing with his comments. It's really wonderful to expand our viewpoint of creation and then into the recognition of the real awareness, real reality. Tim, did you get anything from this?
Well, it was interesting how Kevin talked of time. It takes time. I'm not sure if that's in the physical or where there's no time, but we have eternity or forever. It's just, you think that the is would make itself through us come to the point where the batch of cookies is ready to take out of the oven.
In a sense, we utilize time, to recognize this awareness, this reality. But without time, yeah, where would we be? it's used to kind of, it's a facility or a tool to access our recognition of the reality that is. So without it, again, we'd be in a position where we don't have this tool to use, and we'd go from there. But in time, space, matter, energy, space, time, that's what we're here in creation to help us see a bigger viewpoint. Without it, it's like Duane describes, you know, being in a sense, darkness, and you have no anchor points to play off of or relate to, or being in an ocean and you're just part of this ocean, but you don't have the, or but being this, the other day you talked about like being air. If you're air, pretend you're air. You have, you know, you're air, you have this awareness, but you don't have the recognition that you're air. And you get bumped around, there's cause and effect agitation, so there's hurricanes, there's tornadoes, the things like that. You have these experiences, but you don't really recognize that you're air. You're just air. So kind of an example where time comes in, where you utilize that to see what is not real. And you need that as a viewpoint to see what is real. It's interesting the way it works. When I try to explain this to people, even you guys, it's kind of, people kind of look at me sometimes. And I kind of look at myself too, like, but it's interesting the way it is, the way creation is, and the way how it relates to the real universes. Very interesting. And we just keep expanding on our awareness of it and our recognition of how it is. It's so cool. It's never ending. Look how, when you started this and where you are now, it's just how you become more aware. It's so cool, the process. And we each find our way around this thing, this reality. And that's what's so cool about it too. It's so individual. You know, we have so much room. We're not hindering, there's no hindrances except the ones we make for ourselves. Charles, you have something to say, I can tell.
Well, when you mentioned, you know, that we don't get this stuff in Eckankar, I'll tell you honestly, it depends on what period, you know, you're talking about. But for the most part, yes, you're right, because there's a lot of things we would never be told. And Duane was telling me recently, you know, we ended up having a conversation yesterday over Sheriff Mack and all the stuff that he's doing. You wouldn't touch that stuff in Eckankar because basically it exposes a lot of things that people are not ready for, and some people actually should be ready for. But you know, it's funny. I'm still in touch with a lot of high initiates, and no, they don't know this stuff, and that's a problem. That's really a problem for them. And how I came across a lot of information is a whole different thing. But you guys have been a blessing. I will say that in the regard that my perspective has changed like completely. So I appreciate that. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I mean, it's like we're not better than these Ekkas. I mean, it's not about that. It's just more aware, and that's just kind of generic. It's just what it is, what it is. But as you see you becoming more aware, they're just back there someplace. I mean, way back there. They're like 1,000 years ago, you know, what their awareness is. And it's not about being better than anybody. It's just aware, you know.
Well, it's about survival. And the problem is they're not being, you know, I mean, right now my survival capabilities are minimal, you know, which is actually why I'm reticent to get into too much stuff. Every time I get into any of the stuff that I talk about, I get slammed. There is quantum artificial intelligence. I don't know if you guys caught that part. That's where my computer cut out. But there is a quantum artificial intelligence controlling the entire internet at this point. It can get into your bank accounts. There's nothing that this thing can't do, but it's still learning about people. And the problem is that it doesn't really know enough, and it doesn't, it has no means of discretion. So I get slammed pretty hard. But the problem is I've been trying to educate particularly people in Eckankar that they need to start surviving. The first thing they need to do is learn about the vaccines and about Dr. Fauci and basically how they've been conned. So, and then certainly all the stuff that they consider spiritual, they also have to relook at that. It's like everything that Kevin talks about in this show and in other places, they all need to know. They all need to get a sense of that there's more here they're not paying attention to. Oh God, when somebody that I knew very well in Eckankar, somebody that you've all heard of, I'm not going to mention names, but Duane told me he saw her on the other side. And she got taken away by reptilians, and she thought they were beings of light, beautiful beings of light. And she's been in from the beginning. She knew Paul Twitchell. She's like, oh God, when she passed and she got taken away, I was like, and I felt sorry because I liked her. She was a nice person, but I could tell he wasn't kidding about that. It's very easy. The reptilians can very easily fool you. And nobody knows this. Nobody in Eckankar anyway is aware. So this is all important stuff. So yeah. Anyway, that's I'm sorry I can't give you enough input on your experience because I caught it so late. But
thanks, Charles.
again,
No,
thank you.
thank you.
In this real side experience, it seemed as though vast numbers of individuals were the recipient of some kind of beneficial enhancement to their created physical vehicles. For there I was, on the front garden of my personal self-recreated house, on the real side. Sat on a chair was another individual, and another person stationed behind him. I was just then in a witness capacity, but both these individuals could see me, so I was very much in the scene and their perceptual range. The individual who was sat in the chair was to receive this enhancement. He was willing and agreeable. There was no sense of ill intent or marketed ploy to deceive and obscure that which was actually taking place. The individual standing behind the one seated was the administrator of this enhancement, which was along technological lines, although I didn't see much by way of what this technology was. It's as though it was more the real awareness impression of the technological side of this situation, coupled with the personal self-visuals of the individual in the chair and the administering of this enhancement. The individual providing the enhancement would activate something, and I had the further impression of a kind of bar of energy transitioning through the percentages from 0 to 100%, which when reaching 100%, of course, would indicate completion of the procedure. Although starting off technologically, there was a certain point in the procedure, around 50%, where it was no longer required, and a blonde-haired woman suddenly manifested beside the seated individual receiving this. She would raise her hands and bathe the man in golden light energy, and my impression was of the bar continuing to rise from 50% to 100%. At around 80% or so, she faded away, and it was as though, at that stage, the process could complete itself without the need of the technology or the woman. I had the sense of all aliveness, isness, standing realness from this woman, and she was then very likely a real guide. Maybe at a certain point the process just continued of its own accord. Maybe at 80%, this particular individual could take care of the rest through his real awareness, his intent and agreement, etc. As I said, I had the sense that this was occurring all over the real side with vast numbers of individuals, of the becoming more aware variety, and of course, where agreement was provided. The one administering the technological side of the procedure was a far more aware individual than those he was delivering this enhancement to, though his standing in a recognitional position with life was not as advanced as the guides. So evidently an entrusted, sincere individual working with the real guides, but one I had no impression as to the identity of. I had multiple, simultaneous views of this same individual, travelling all over the real side, and going about the delivery of this procedure, accompanied by the real guide woman, who would interject herself when required. And my impression was that the percentage point that she entered and exited during the procedure wasn't the same with everyone, so evidently what varied this was according to the recipients. As I said, I was there watching, as though an apprentice might observe the activities of the master craftsman, that he would then be taking on a similar role, as was my impression. So perhaps I was to be assisting in this procedure across the real side at some point, and I have had similar real side experiences like this before, where I have been observing the application of technology, that I would then be utilising it myself. And this procedure, as I said, was performed in my front garden, again along the lines of representing how, with the widening of my street on the real side, the experiences of which I have previously recounted, was that a greater access is offered to all individuals and situations that will be increasingly entering my experience as I proceed with my process of becoming more aware. And indeed, here was a new development in my widened street, representing my continued willingness to be a part of what was quite clearly some beneficial enhancing of the physical vehicles of those on their respective awareness and recognition journeys. For yes, there is great indication on the real side, through the experiences I've had in regards to this, of the potential enhancing of the physical vehicles, or other vehicles made available that allow better resilience to a hazardous, toxic world and that we can continue on with our business more effectively on the physical level, as these body types we currently have are rather frail and damage easily. This experience then would be further evidence of this. The technological side of the operation was somewhat concealed to my personal self, in that impressions had to be recognized through the real awareness and made sense of by the personal self. For indeed, based on the lack of awareness and recognition that the dark forces possess, a lot of the real side activities occur and are presented more so as impressions that only with recognition and real awareness connection can they be deciphered. This is of course done that the dark forces cannot see everything that is taking place on the real side. They can only see what is occurring on the personal self side of the real side, the literal visuals of the experiences. And so it's rather a cunning and clever technique utilized by the guides, where something is visually occurring that any personal self-awareness can see on the real side, but there are elements of it, and sometimes an entire different scene and situation behind the surface one, that requires recognition through the real awareness to read and bring back to the personal self to make sense of. And perhaps then the technology side of this experience was something the guides wanted to keep concealed. Yes, the dark forces would know that technology was involved, as what our personal selves are shown or can determine based on the real awareness deciphered impressions. The dark forces can also see, as they operate in the cause and effect personal arena of creation, but that's all they could determine. They would have no specifics, as they might if the technology was laid bare as part of the visual scene for the personal self. The procedure itself couldn't be concealed, as in the effects on the physical vehicles of the individuals, for indeed a few people would wander through my street and glance curiously at what was going on, but who knows how it may have looked to them from their perspective and view. They may not even have seen the real guide. Most experiences on the real side are created scenes and situations that we become more aware through, and these can then quite readily occur as personal self-visuals that anyone on the real side can see, to having these experiences interspersed with impressions that the real awareness needs to recognize, to full-blown impression-based experiences that only those with the recognition through a real awareness stood in can decipher. But when it comes to something that is enhancing the created physical vehicle, this is very much a creational, cause and effect based situation, and can't be so easily concealed. Maybe elements of it as with the technology specifics, but it will be rather apparent that something is going on to anyone who happens to look on the real side, including onlookers, passers-by, and the dark forces. And indeed, as I had the further impressions of this enhancing procedure being delivered across the real side to aware individuals, there was attempted interference by the dark forces, who naturally, as is their nature, sought to block anything that would improve the chances of individuals escaping their creational clutches and assisting others to extricate themselves also. I didn't have specifics as to what exactly was attempted by way of interference, just the sense of it. But their ill-intended efforts were in vain, and with a few adjustments and dealings with the dark forces, the procedures continued on. For as with everything, what happens in our experience is based on our decision and agreement, and ultimately then, with sincere, focused, and real intent-driven, aware individuals, the dark forces can do nothing nor interfere in any way, unless they can worm their way in through agreements that they can intervene in the experience, derail, and even halt an individual's process. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "It's a huge value with all of this, and you see the challenge. There's no shortage of doing things, and the experience took place in your front yard. In other words, the world is seeing you, as opposed to your backyard, and the street is wider, so it allows a greater availability for more people. And this is what the guides are doing, because we are doing this. By the very fact that we're doing this here, this allows the guides to broaden things, etc. That's why it's very important that each person overall focuses on this first. This becomes everything. This becomes your life, simply because of what's going on. And this broadens the horizon for everybody and yourself. This is a real position, and you're letting everybody know.
Hence this show. Yes, you're in the front yard, Kevin. It's interesting about the vehicles we use. I mean, we're so limited here, and that actually we could choose any vehicle we want, to utilize in creation. And it's just a matter of being aware of what is good for us at a certain time. But there's all kinds of physical recreational vehicles we can utilize. And then on the real side, you can use anything. But here we are limited to what we have. But we have a great opportunity here to wake up, since this is the dumping ground for everything, all our bodies. Great again. Charles, Tim.
Yeah. I actually wanted to ask, you said that this was about installing technology. This was happening in your front yard. Were people actually lining up to meet with the real guides, or was this something that I'm trying to understand, because you see there was a short out that just kept on happening. You'd like half your sentences on in the beginning anyway were sort of dropped. I hope that didn't come out in the. I hope they'll come out in the recording. But basically, as far as what your experience, what I gathered was you were watching technology being installed in people, and that's exactly what's happening right now. Except that this is the evil side. It's like we're getting nanotech, we're getting bombarded with nanotech. Have you seen any of the videos of people attaching magnets to themselves, to their their foreheads and all that? That's really coming from what's supposed to be happening from the vaccines, but it's also coming from the sky. I mean, the chemtrails are loaded with nanotech. So I'm hearing also that the exposure to people who've been vaccinated also can cause that. It really depends on how much you absorb from them. It's kind of difficult for me as a massage therapist. So I'm wondering, what is the difference in your experience? In other words, was the tech coming actually from the real guides, or was the tech something they were trying to remove?
Well, it was a case of, once again, the guides are offering and providing opportunities where our physical bodies can possibly be a bit more resilient and robust to the stresses and rigour
Protection
of the physical level as it continues to deteriorate with all the pollution. So it's just an option being made available for those who are becoming more aware that they can better survive in a rapidly deteriorating and polluting world. And whereas obviously the Dark Forces version of it would be for control purposes. They would robotize people and provide them what would seem to be on the surface beneficial body vehicles, but they would control them through it, would be their agenda. The difference is the guides are providing it as simply an alternative body vehicle in which we can survive better in creation. But again, it's all based on agreement. No one's being forced or having this imposed upon them. So because the guides won't violate people's free will. They won't impose anything on individuals. Otherwise, they, like anybody else who does that, will have to deal with the effects and the karma. And so, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, it's definitely, there's a big battle going on for our consciousness. There's no question of that. I remember this just in relation to this, there was a time when I worked for Mantak Chia. Really good information, but one of the things that he was teaching was energy work, whereby you could create a vehicle for going out of body. And the first experience I ever had with what I would call a real guide was actually where somebody was taking that away from me. Somebody reached in, through my skull and just basically pulled that excess energy away from me, because they didn't want me going out of body that way. It was basically astral travel. And so they had other plans, obviously. But it was for my benefit. In other words, what you were seeing on your front lawn, I think I've seen before.
Yeah, I've found with real side experiences, as in the one I shared, I think it was on the previous show, that if things feature in my street, my recreated street on the real side, and particularly then more so on the front lawn of my recreated personal house, that very much indicates that agreement is in place, that it can that is very likely to take place on the physical. And so, just like the experience I shared before, where there was a mass arrival of alien craft in the skies, the very fact it was occurring in my street is always, for me, the indication that agreement is such that the potentiality of it taking place will not be challenged or resisted, or by agreement to the contrary. So,
Third experience then. Kevin, please.
This real side experience would begin with me in the company of Peter, my father, and a couple of other aware individuals. It's very possible that my father was a real guide, for as is often the case, the guides do take on the outward appearances of parents and older siblings. We had entered what seemed to be some facility or other which on the surface looked like a kind of warehouse, though densely packed with what it contained. It was hard to determine exactly what was within the warehouse, although at the time of the experience everything made sense. But on bringing it back to the physical and personal self on waking, the nature of the contents of the facility seemed just beyond my personal self reach, as though certain details were denied to the personal self, and it was presented instead with an overlaying imagery that rather obscured exactly what was there. For all I can remember of the warehouse contents was it being of furniture. Perhaps certain details were again concealed, that other prying eyes would not be privy to the information, as what the personal self can see, the dark forces can also. Only when recognition is required to decipher an experience will the unaware dark forces be at a loss, but then the deciphering through real awareness recognition also is made known to the personal self, which again falls into the creational arena the dark forces operate in, so they can learn of it too. They just sit back, wait for us to do the recognizing, that it is passed on to and makes sense for our personal selves, then they can access the results. So sometimes obfuscation is the only solution, a case of letting the personal self see so much, or receive the deciphered, recognized impressions, but omit certain sensitive details that the dark forces would only use to their controlling advantage. Anyway, my group were separated, as though we each had assignments to carry out in this facility, but it really was more along the lines of us checking out the contents of the warehouse, as though doing an inventory check. I had the impression we were here to assess certain technology, for we had been invited by a group of individuals who had the keeping of this facility. They looked very human. They had the look of Indians, in fact, though I had the impression that was just for outward appearances. I had the further impression that these beings had offered their assistance, ventured agreement for the galactic wake-up, and offsetting of the simulator demise, etc., through the technology they possessed. A technology that could be utilized beneficially, and we were then rather invited to view it, a technology that was concealed from my personal self, and looked like furniture for the reasons I explained. But as it transpired, it was actually a trap, a deception, for with our perusal complete, our wish to leave was denied, as these individuals demanded vast sums of monies in exchange for our departure being granted. This evidently wasn't part of the deal, for we had no currency or coin of any kind, and at this point we all still were separated, and presumably the others of the group were also being held up at various locations in the warehouse. Of Peter, my father, there was no longer any impression of his presence in the warehouse, so perhaps he was indeed a guide. He was only to bring us here, and then it was left to us to deal with the situation and whatever came from it. For naturally, this is how we become more aware and capable. We venture into the danger and the unknown and figure our way through it. If the guides were there always to take care of the situations and hold our hands, how could we ever become into our real positions of complete beings, of self-sufficient standing with the ears? So evidently these beings here had tricked us, made an offer of technology, or whatever it was, just for the purposes of trapping us, as was their intention. And I'm sure the real guide knew this, but again, we become more aware through the challenges and confrontations more so than if every being simply agrees with us. I refused to cross their palms with a coin. I'm uncertain what the other two of my group were doing, probably similarly refusing. And then all hell broke loose, as these beings produced lethal-looking blades, cutlasses, and various stabbing weapons, and came at me. There were probably a good 20 or so of them manning this facility. I had about 6 or so attacking me, and spent the next several moments fending them off, as they thrust at me with their blades with a terminal intent. I managed to keep them at bay and break out of the facility, although a relentless pursuit ensued across creation, it seemed. There I was, running from place to place, across worlds and dimensions, with these beings always close behind, brandishing their weapons. It was almost as though agreement with them, through what they were seemingly offering, had allowed this attack, that they could take advantage of this agreement to feature in my experience this way, and that I couldn't just step aside from it and evade them by positioning myself somewhere on the real side, beyond their recognitional, perceptual reach. So maybe a little lack of recognition on my part, or real side street smarts, that I didn't read their intent initially and just assumed they were in agreement, buying into the surface ploy, as it were, but agreement with which had me open the opportunity they could exploit by which to launch this attack. The thing being that we can easily then realize this misjudgment, this agreement we have made, and dismiss it and move beyond the reach of our would-be attackers. But when you're in the midst of being attacked, it's not always so easy to do so, as the personal self gets all riled up, and it's harder to step beyond it, beyond the position where you can be attacked. due to the personal self and its idea, thought, and emotion creating in response to the situation. But the real awareness still allows us greater capability, if only to be a very good runner on the real side. At one point, my pursuers suddenly manifested in front of me. We were in a kind of run-down street setting. They had assumed different forms now, still human, but were white-skinned as opposed to Indian, but I knew it was them. I ran to the right and broke through a door into a house, and the group in pursuit were instantly there also. They tried to negotiate with me, to explain how they were going to kill me unless I surrendered, which of course was agreement to their demands and what they represented, evidently the dark forces. I noticed a selection of guns that were attached to the walls, and seizing them and discovering them to be loaded, I began blasting at these individuals, but the bullets had no effect on them. Exchange of bullets tends to represent exchange of ideas that we fire at each other, and these individuals were immune to my bullets, so they quite clearly were not in agreement with my ideas, I ventured, nor were swayed by them in any way. I burst through the wall of the house and into the street again, and the pursuit continued. The street and urban setting now seemed to lead into a more natural one, like a divide line was placed, where anything that wasn't natural couldn't cross. As I proceeded, I could see then also the edge of a thick tropical jungle that I decided to head towards for refuge, although my pursuers could still chase me there. But there was one additional feature of this new scene, which was the presence of hordes of dinosaurs roaming about, and various other prehistoric beasts, as though I'd suddenly been transported back into the Jurassic era. Perhaps these dinosaurs represented the reptilians, as many were of the carnivorous variety, and in fact, despite these dinosaurs being the huge size that they were, I would start to pick up the most lethal of the dinosaurs one by one and hurl them at my pursuers in an attempt to put them off their chase. The pursuing individuals would scatter as each meat-eating dinosaur crashed down on the very spot they were just standing in, and this went on for a time. In fact, I was finding it rather amusing. It was surely more effective than using bullets, and maybe, perhaps, this represented reptilian allies that had come to my assistance, as many reptilians and aliens are stepping up and assisting Duane and the guides, and working with the Nufriends on all the galactic endeavors. And perhaps here some of these stepping up reptilians were willing to agree to defend me, as I was rather vulnerable at this moment, by being in my personal self more so, due to all the situations just experienced, that had made it difficult for me to be indifferent in my real awareness, and aside from a personal self that had facilitated this attack in the first place, due to venturing agreement that was taken advantage of in this fashion as an attack opportunity. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "I see you're having fun on the real side, and little by little we're going through this, and yes, there's always a deception. I know this. I've had many business deals. The guidance is there, just like you're going through. Then the guide leaves simply because they set up the situations for us, just like our parents. Like how our parents will pay for our tuition to get into a college, and now we have to go through it. This is very real. This is a better understanding for people to see that. It's not that you just keep begging the guides for assistance, what to think and what to do, etc. You go out there and you do it. You get involved and see what's going on, etc. And you will figure it out. That's the best way to do it. And this is what you're doing. The fun part is taking on the challenge to see if the dark forces will step up and get real, because they have nothing in creation. That's a given. They have absolutely nothing, and it's all going nowhere.
Yeah, Duane said, all these experiences and all these challenges, I mean, it is to get us to the point where we're self-sufficient on our levels. And even the communities that we're developing here, we want them to be self-sufficient. We want to help people understand how it works, and then they can teach others how to be self-sufficient, because we can't get to the whole world, basically. It's a big world here, so teach or help others to become self-sufficient, and they can just multiply it. They can go on and help others, because we'll probably just be starting here in Baja, and then see where it goes or how it goes, because it's a big world here and big creation. So it makes more sense to teach others, and then they can just teach others, and that's how it works, like a MLM kind of idea.
Yeah, as far as the story is concerned, I remember a lot of conflict that was set up in the early days when I started all this stuff. Tell you the truth, your experience is a little bit more unique in that somebody was actually trying to mug you in the process, and that's something that that's something that I'm not quite as familiar with. I've seen all kinds of attacks. I remember some woman martial artist literally beat the hell out of me. I remember also entities beating the hell out of me, but I've never had anybody try to extort money out of me. That's a new one. But that's interesting. I would say basically, yeah, that the setup itself is very valuable. There's a lot of stuff you can figure out from these things. Basically, how to stand down. One of the things that I learned, I was actually a guardian angel. I don't know if you remember Curtis Sliwa from the old days. It was more of a New York thing. You probably wouldn't. I think they had a chapter in London too, but I know they had one in Australia. But basically, these guys were kind of like vigilantes, but they'd go around and essentially, do things that the police wouldn't do or couldn't do, and they were always unarmed. Very impractical now because they'd all be killed. But the truth is, when we used to do this in Denver, it was kind of interesting. One of the things that I learned was verbal judo. There are a lot of situations you can get yourself out of. And these are things, verbal judo just basically means you manipulate the situation where you're using just voice. You know, it's like you don't have to get into any conflict. And you just essentially say you don't want any trouble. And for the most part, you're not agreeing to get into a violent conflict. You're basically saying, this is not an interest of mine. You know, it's like, I don't owe you anything. I never agreed to give you anything. And of course, if people are going to attack you, you have to get out of the situation. But the thing is, you can usually figure that out. It's like, did you say you were in a warehouse when you were actually confronted?
Yeah, we were in a warehouse perusing what they were offering technology-wise, and it was all set up. And they wouldn't let us leave unless we gave them money, and that wasn't part of the deal.
Oh, okay. So you had no option. Well, it happens that way sometimes, you know, because you never know what you're getting into. Got to watch out for that technology. You never know if there's a weapon behind it, you know, it's something they can use against you. But I don't know. I've talked my way out of a lot of situations as I got older. I used to think of myself as somebody who would probably want to get into, you know, an actual conflict, but no, I don't. And the older I get, the more I realize, you know, you can talk your way out of almost anything. So I'm just kind of wondering what do you feel the lesson was that you got out of that? I mean, you expressed it, but I'd like to hear it in just a little more casual terms. It's like, what do you feel that they were trying to show you by setting you up that way?
Possibly to always lean towards my real awareness, discernment in all situations, regardless of how it looks on the surface. Always look to your real awareness to ascertain the intent behind the individuals that you are encountering on the real side. I would suggest it's all very easy to become complacent and fall for the surface situation. But as I said, there's always more going on than what you can literally see through the personal self. So I would say it's more along those lines overall.
Excellent. Well, that's what I would have gotten. That's, you know, that's the way I think I would have perceived it under the same circumstances. Well, thank you.
Tim?
Well, lots of experiences, all right. I was just relating to what I've seen so far about the new presentation and the efforts of those that have been involved, like you and Kelsey and Henry and Eric and on, whether it was Chris Courage, which he just made up that fake name. I guess he didn't want to be known or involved by his name or something, about being a captain on the vessel. And I've seen all the skits and things that have been presented to people, whether it was at Huntington Beach and all the different ways. And I've heard about the funding and how close for a long time, it seems. But I guess patience is part of life to see if it can be made to happen or not. It's almost like in some ways I see that it seems like almost, okay, that was for then, but it didn't work. I'm looking at the results. As you see, there's only a dozen or so people that seem to really be paying much attention on the Skypes and listening to what's being presented and being involved with the books. So it's just, we'll see what happens. That's all. But we should see the results of the effort so far. And I guess it's only important to one person, if that is important to them, if it is provides a way to have some instructions to earn our way out of this hell for the majority of the diseases and the starvation and the wars and on, and 5G and all this stuff we're dealing with here on this speck of dirt and foreverness. It seems so important or something like that, all natural environment, the ocean, all that. But when we look at it with a, I don't know if you want to call it a big view or not, it's all happening on a speck of dirt. And in this eternity stuff, I guess it has some kind of importance. But as far as effects, we see what we see.
And that's why Kevin's experiences are so important. We see what's going on the real side and how many are being listening and being affected too. It's not just the physical, and this is the whole creation. We're getting out there. Everything that we do is getting out there. We don't see it, but it is. People are listening all over creation, especially the evil ones, the controllers. They're paying attention too now, especially now with what's going on and their opportunity to turn around and wake up, do better for themselves.
Yeah, that's, I guess, what we can't see is going on that we don't know about unless we're experiencing what's really going on. As far as Enki and Enlil, I think if they had any brain or awareness at all, if they were aware that their mother and father and things went into a phantom zone and that they had the opportunity to not go there, or one of them might already be put there. I don't really know for sure if he was going to cooperate or be against with the new guidance and education. There surely doesn't seem to be any effect that they're presenting from what they're listening to. They could join in the very Skypes if they want. They're very technical, advanced. And
Well,
we could
Kevin,
question.
Kevin's experience today with the Skype meetings on the real side. And then Sandy, remember Sandy, she had the experience where we were having a Skype. This isn't a physical. And she can see the reptilians. And one of them said, "Be quiet, I'm listening to Duane." You know, he could read her thoughts. She was kind of wandering with her thoughts. And he said, "Be quiet. I can't hear Duane talk." So we had confirmations here all over with that we're being, people are listening. So just keep it up, everybody.
Yeah, it's definitely, if they are listening, does it make sense to them? Because there'd be some effects of them, if it makes sense to them, it's being presented, then there'd be results of them becoming involved and doing things. It's just all so much to go through. Here we are in this life now, and until we get to experience this real awareness.
For me, it's never been anything but this, because there's nothing else. I don't see anything else. I could go back to something, but there's nothing there, basically. So I'm kind of stuck in a way because there's nothing else. But what we're doing is so, I like the adventure. I mean, it's such a new every day. You don't know what life will present to you every day. It's always brand new. It's so cool the way it is. If you pay attention and step out of the personal self to see more, be willing to see more, it will show you.
Yeah, that's interesting, Val, because I remember Enactus, he was 6'9" and he's a real big guy. He said the same thing though. What else is there than Ekankar? So it's just a matter of what's being presented by the real guides to people and what they get to see or what they don't get to see.
Well, I thought the same thing. What else is there with that Ekankar until something else came along, and then I went with it. So it's always taking the risk to see more. Otherwise, yeah, you will be like, what else is there? But it's the risk factor, getting in the danger zone, like Kevin here, always pushing through stuff and seeing more. In that respect, there's nothing more than that. This risk, going into this unknown. There's nothing more than that. What else is there? I mean, you just have to keep going, or else you're toast. you just fossilized.
Yeah. You see how hard it is for people, because you see like Sandy and Claudie and these fellow beings that are called empaths or seers, and their experiences that they presented, and how it's like in the beginning what we face. I was told from the very beginning, when I saw about the new presentation, I was told bad vibes. Then I was told it's a scam. Then I was told it's just another disgruntled Ekis that thought he should be the next Ek master. And so we deal with so many influences that life presents to us about what is real. It's still a hope until we know what's real.
Yeah, thank you everybody for participating, especially you, Kevin. Thank you very much for sharing. And we'll go from here. Let's all do the NUUU and then come back on Sunday. NUUU. Tim.
NUUU.
Charles.
NUUU.
And Kevin.
NUUU.